My mother-in-law secretly rewrote my dying husband's will. When the notary opened the sealed envelope at the reading, everyone in the room nearly collapsed. But what truly destroyed her was the second envelope, the one she never knew existed. My name is Amelia Carter. I am 34 years old, and until 6 months ago, I believed I had the kind of life women write gratitude journals about. A beautiful colonial home in Westport, Connecticut. A loving husband named Daniel, who ran a successful real estate development firm worth roughly $60 million. And a mother-in-law, Patricia Ashford Carter, who smiled at me with porcelain white teeth while secretly sharpening a knife behind her back. The day everything changed began on a Tuesday in late October. The leaves on our maple-lined street had turned burnt orange, and the air smelled like chimney smoke and dying flowers. Daniel had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer exactly 9 months earlier. The doctors gave him a year. He lasted 8 months and 26 days. That Tuesday morning, I was sitting beside his hospital bed at Yale New Haven, holding his hand. His skin was the color of old paper. The monitors beeped in a steady, mechanical rhythm that I had grown to hate because it reminded me that every heartbeat was borrowed time. Daniel's eyes fluttered open. He looked at me with a clarity that startled me. His voice was barely a whisper, but each word was deliberate, as if he had been rehearsing them while I thought he was sleeping. Amelia, listen to me carefully. Don't trust my mother. I squeezed his hand. Daniel, don't talk like that. Save your strength. No. He gripped my fingers with a force I didn't think he still had. She's been visiting Attorney Whitfield. She thinks I don't know, but I know everything. I have a plan. Promise me you'll go see Martin Hale on Elm Street the day after the funeral. Not before, the day after. Promise me. I promised, though I didn't fully understand what he meant. Daniel closed his eyes and a tear slid down his hollow cheek. You deserved a longer story with me, Amelia. I pressed my forehead against his hand and whispered, You gave me the best chapters. He smiled. It was the last time I saw him smile. Daniel Carter died at 3:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. The hospital chaplain said a prayer. The nurse removed the IV lines, and I sat in that vinyl chair for 2 more hours, holding a hand that was growing colder by the minute, refusing to accept that the warmest person I had ever known was gone. Patricia arrived at the hospital at 6 a.m. sharp, dressed in head-to-toe black Chanel, as if she had been waiting in the wings for her cue. Her eyes were dry. Her lipstick was perfectly applied. She walked into the room, glanced at Daniel's body, and then looked at me with an expression I can only describe as administrative. We need to discuss the arrangements. No tears, no collapse, no mother clutching her dead son's face, just logistics. I should have recognized the warning signs right then, but grief makes you generous with people who don't deserve it. The funeral was held at Christ Church in Greenwich. Over 300 people attended. Business associates, old college friends, local politicians, and the entire social circle Patricia had spent decades cultivating. She stood at the front of the church, delivering a eulogy so polished it sounded like a TED Talk. My son was my greatest achievement. Everything he built because of the values I instilled in him. I sat in the front pew, my black dress soaked with tears, and thought about how Daniel used to say his mother took credit for the sunrise. He would joke about it, but underneath the humor was a deep, unresolved wound. Patricia had always treated Daniel as an extension of herself, a trophy she produced and displayed. And me? I was the display case, useful, but ultimately replaceable. After the burial, the reception was held at Patricia's estate in Old Greenwich. The house was a sprawling Georgian mansion with 12 bedrooms, a tennis court, and a wine cellar that could stock a small restaurant. Everything about it screamed generational wealth, which was ironic because Patricia had married into the Ashford money and spent 30 years pretending she'd been born with it. I was standing alone by the catering table, picking out a finger sandwich I had no appetite for, when Patricia's younger sister Diane sidled up to me. Diane was the family gossip. She collected secrets the way other women collected handbags. "Amelia, darling." Diane placed a cold hand on my arm. "I just want you to know that Patricia has been meeting with Gerald Whitfield every week for the past 2 months." "The attorney?" My stomach tightened. "Why?" Diane shrugged, but her eyes glittered with barely concealed excitement. "Something about Daniel's estate. I overheard her on the phone saying she needed to make sure the original terms were adjusted before the reading." She sipped her champagne. "I'm only telling you because I think it's important you protect yourself." I stared at her, trying to determine if this was genuine concern or if Diane was simply stirring the pot for entertainment. With the Ashford family, it was usually the latter. But her words aligned perfectly with Daniel's warning. Don't trust my mother. That night, alone in the Westport house that Daniel and I had shared for 7 years, I sat on our bed and stared at the ceiling. The house was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking. Every tick felt like it was counting down to something terrible. I pulled out my phone and searched for Martin Hale, attorney at law, Elm Street. He had a modest website. No flashy graphics, no list of celebrity clients, just a clean page that read, "Estate planning, trusts, and probate. Serving Fairfield County since 1987. Daniel had chosen this man deliberately. Not the family's high-powered Manhattan firm. Not Gerald Whitfield, who had handled the Carter family's legal affairs for decades. A quiet, independent lawyer on a side street. Daniel was hiding something from his own mother, and whatever it was, he wanted me to find it. I barely slept that night. When I did, I dreamed of Daniel sitting across from me at our kitchen table, tapping a sealed envelope on the wood. "Open it when you're ready to fight," he said. The next morning, exactly as Daniel had instructed, I drove to Elm Street. Martin Hale's office was above a dry cleaner. The staircase was narrow and smelled faintly of pressed linen. I knocked on the frosted glass door. "Come in," said a voice that sounded like gravel wrapped in velvet. Martin Hale was in his late 60s, with silver hair, thick glasses, and hands that looked like they'd spent a lifetime turning pages. His office was small but meticulously organized. Every file was labeled. Every book was alphabetized. He looked up when I entered, and his expression immediately softened. "Mrs. Carter, I've been expecting you." He gestured to the chair across from his oak desk. "Please sit down. I'm very sorry for your loss. Daniel was a good man, one of the best I've ever known." "Thank you." I sat down, clutching my purse like a lifeline. "Daniel told me to come see you the day after the funeral. He said you had something important." Martin nodded slowly. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. The wax bore the imprint of Daniel's signet ring, a ring I had given him on our 5th anniversary. "Before I hand this to you," Martin said carefully, "I need to explain the context. Daniel came to me 14 months ago, before his diagnosis. He suspected his mother was attempting to alter the terms of his estate plan. Specifically, he believed she was pressuring Gerald Whitfield to draft a new will that would redirect the majority of his assets to a family trust she controlled. My blood ran cold. She was rewriting his will? Not exactly rewriting. Martin leaned back. Patricia couldn't change Daniel's will without his signature. But Daniel discovered she had obtained a power of attorney document, one that Daniel allegedly signed during a period when he was heavily medicated after his first round of chemotherapy. With that power of attorney, she authorized Whitfield to execute a new will on Daniel's behalf. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. That's fraud. It's a very serious crime, Martin agreed, which is why Daniel came to me. He wanted to create a second will, an airtight, independently witnessed document that would supersede anything Patricia and Whitfield produced. He also wanted to document everything Patricia was doing, just in case. Martin pushed the envelope toward me. This contains Daniel's true last will and testament, signed and witnessed by two independent parties, notarized and recorded. It also contains copies of the fraudulent power of attorney, correspondence between Patricia and Whitfield, and a detailed letter Daniel wrote to you. I stared at the envelope. My hands were shaking. Martin, why didn't Daniel confront her? Martin took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Because he was dying, Mrs. Carter. He didn't have the energy for a war with his mother. What he had was the foresight to make sure you would be protected after he was gone. He looked at me with deep, genuine compassion. Daniel told me, and I quote, "My mother will try to take everything from Amelia the moment I'm gone. She'll do it with a smile and a Bible verse. I need someone to make sure my wife has a fighting chance." I couldn't hold it together anymore. The tears came in a flood, not just from grief, but from the overwhelming realization that even while dying, Daniel had been protecting me. I sat in that small office above the dry cleaner and cried until my ribs ached. Martin waited patiently. When I finally composed myself, he handed me a tissue and spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Mrs. Carter, the official reading of Daniel's will, the one Patricia arranged through Whitfield, is scheduled for next Thursday at Whitfield's Manhattan office. I assume you received the notice." I did. I wiped my eyes. Patricia's assistant emailed me the details yesterday. "Here is what I recommend," Martin said, leaning forward. "Attend the reading. Say nothing about this envelope. Let Patricia and Whitfield present their version. Let them believe they've won. And then, when the time is right, we present Daniel's real will. Won't it be too late by then?" Not at all. Martin allowed himself a small, almost mischievous smile. "In Connecticut, the most recently executed valid will takes precedence. Daniel's will with me was signed 3 months after the one Whitfield has. And unlike Whitfield's version, ours wasn't obtained through fraud." I drove home in a daze. The autumn sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. I kept replaying Daniel's last words. "Don't trust my mother. She thinks I don't know, but I know everything." He knew. He knew his own mother was stealing from him while he was dying, and instead of confronting her, he quietly built a fortress around me. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of legal documents, each one meticulously prepared. But on top of everything was a handwritten letter on Daniel's personal stationery. The handwriting was shaky, written in the final weeks of his life, but every word was clear. "My dearest Amelia, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. There are things I need to tell you that I couldn't say out loud because the walls in our family have ears. My mother has been planning to take control of my estate since the day I was diagnosed. She views my illness not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. She has never accepted you as my wife, not because you did anything wrong, but because you represent the one thing she cannot control, my heart. I discovered 6 months ago that she obtained a forged power of attorney using my signature from a stack of medical consent forms I signed while sedated after chemo. She used that document to instruct Gerald Whitfield to draft a new will that leaves 80% of my estate to the Ashford Carter Family Trust, which she controls entirely. You would receive the Westport house and a $200,000 annual allowance, essentially a golden cage. The business, the investment portfolio, the commercial properties, and the liquid assets, all of it goes to her trust. She planned this with the precision of a military campaign. Martin Hale has my real will. In it, you receive everything. The company, the properties, the accounts, everything. I'm not doing this to punish my mother. I'm doing this because you are my wife, my partner, and the only person who ever loved me for who I was, not for what I was worth. Fight for yourself, Amelia. Don't let her win. And remember, the woman who smiles the widest at the funeral is usually the one who benefits the most from the death. I love you. Always. Daniel. I read the letter 3 times. Each time, the words cut deeper. Not because of the betrayal. I had suspected Patricia's coldness for years. But because of the weight Daniel had carried alone while his body was shutting down. He spent his final months not just dying, but strategizing to protect me from his own mother. That night, I locked the envelope in the safe Daniel had installed in our bedroom closet. The combination was our wedding date. Patricia had never known it existed. Over the next 6 days leading up to the will reading, I did exactly what Martin had advised. I said nothing. I played the role of the grieving, bewildered widow. Patricia called me twice. Both times, her voice dripped with synthetic sympathy. Amelia, darling, how are you holding up? You know, Daniel would want you to take care of yourself. Don't worry about the legal matters. I'll handle everything. The second call was more pointed. The reading is Thursday at 2 p.m. at Gerald's office in Midtown. Wear something appropriate. I'll send a car. Wear something appropriate. As if I were attending her charity gala, not the legal dismantling of my marriage. I wore black. Simple, elegant, and sharp. When I arrived at Whitfield's office on East 57th Street, the conference room was already populated. Patricia sat at the head of the table, which was telling since this wasn't her meeting to run. She wore a cream-colored Armani suit, pearls, and an expression of practiced solemnity. Gerald Whitfield, a silver-haired man in his 70s with the oily charm of a career enabler, sat beside her. Across the table were Daniel's younger brother Thomas and his wife Rebecca. Thomas was 31, a venture capitalist who had parlayed Daniel's connections into a moderately successful career. He and Daniel had been close once, but Patricia had spent years driving a wedge between them, always whispering to Thomas that Daniel got more, that the family should have distributed things more fairly. Diane was there too, naturally. She sat in the corner like a spectator at a boxing match, already buzzing with anticipation. A court reporter was present, along with Whitfield's junior associate. I took the only remaining seat, at the far end of the table. Patricia didn't acknowledge me beyond a nod. Gerald Whitfield cleared his throat and began. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Daniel James Carter, executed on March 14th of this year and duly witnessed. I kept my face perfectly neutral. March 14th. That was 2 weeks after Daniel's second round of chemo, when he was so weak he could barely lift a spoon. Whitfield unfolded the document and began reading in his measured, legal cadence. To my mother, Patricia Ashford Carter, I leave the stewardship of the Ashford Carter Family Trust, into which I direct 80% of my total estate to be deposited, including all commercial real estate holdings, the operating shares of Carter Development Group, and my investment portfolio. Patricia's face remained a mask of dignified grief, but I saw the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Satisfaction. To my brother, Thomas Andrew Carter, I leave the sum of $500,000 to be distributed from the trust at my mother's discretion. Thomas frowned. That was significantly less than he had expected, and the phrase, "at my mother's discretion," meant Patricia held the keys. To my beloved wife, Amelia Rose Carter, I leave our marital residence in Westport, Connecticut, and an annual allowance of $200,000 to be administered by the trustee of the Ashford Carter Family Trust. There it was, an annual allowance administered by Patricia. I would have to go to my mother-in-law, hat in hand, every year, begging for money that should have been mine. And the house? Without liquid assets to maintain it, I'd eventually be forced to sell, probably to Patricia at a discount. It was elegant in its cruelty. A golden cage, exactly as Daniel had described. Whitfield looked up from the document. Are there any questions? The room was silent. Patricia folded her hands on the table, the picture of composure. She turned to me with that porcelain smile. Amelia, I know this must be overwhelming, but Daniel and I discussed this at length. He wanted to make sure the family's legacy was preserved and properly managed. I want you to know that I will always take care of you. Take care of me. The way you'd take care of a stray cat you inherited with the furniture. I nodded slowly. Thank you, Patricia. That's very generous. Across the table, Thomas was seething quietly. He looked at his mother with barely concealed resentment. $500,000 at her discretion. He had been hoping for a direct share of the company. Diane observed everything with the alertness of a nature documentary host watching a pride of lions fight over a kill. Whitfield began gathering the papers. If there are no objections, we will proceed with the probate filing. Actually, my voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. Everyone froze. I have a question for Mr. Whitfield. Whitfield looked up, mildly irritated. Yes, Mrs. Carter? The power of attorney that authorized this will? When exactly was it signed by Daniel? The temperature in the room dropped by 10 degrees. Patricia's smile calcified. Gerald Whitfield's pen stopped moving. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Whitfield said carefully. I think you are. I opened my purse and pulled out a copy of the fraudulent power of attorney document that Martin had included in the envelope. This document, the one bearing Daniel's signature, dated February 28th, the same day Daniel was in the ICU following a severe reaction to his chemotherapy. I turned to the court reporter. For the record, Daniel was under heavy sedation that entire day. He could not have knowingly signed anything. Patricia's face went through a rapid transformation. The porcelain smile cracked, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. She recovered quickly. Amelia, I don't know where you got that, but Daniel signed that document willingly. He was perfectly lucid. I turned to Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, did you personally witness Daniel sign this document? Whitfield's face had turned the color of old oatmeal. Yes, I was present. Were you at Yale New Haven Hospital on February 28th? Because the visitor logs, which I obtained through a formal records request, show no entry for Gerald Whitfield on that date. Dead silence. Patricia's eyes darted to Whitfield. Whitfield's jaw tightened. Thomas and Rebecca exchanged alarmed glances. Diane looked like she had just been handed front row tickets to the Super Bowl. This is absurd, Patricia snapped. Amelia, you're clearly distraught. Grief does terrible things to people. Perhaps you should step outside and compose yourself. I didn't step outside. I reached into my purse again and pulled out a second envelope, the one sealed with Daniel's signet ring. I placed it on the table. This is Daniel's actual last will and testament. It was executed on June 2nd of this year, nearly 3 months after the document Mr. Whitfield just read. It was prepared by attorney Martin Hale, independently witnessed by 2 parties with no connection to the Carter or Ashford families, and notarized by a state-certified notary public. Under Connecticut law, the most recently executed valid will supersedes all prior versions. Whitfield grabbed the edge of the table. Patricia, her composure finally shattered, stood up so fast her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. That is a forgery. I will not allow this circus to continue. I looked at her calmly. It's not a forgery, Patricia. Daniel's signature has been verified by a forensic handwriting analyst. The witnesses are prepared to testify under oath. And unlike your version, this will was not obtained through a fraudulent power of attorney while a dying man was sedated in a hospital bed. Patricia's face went through every shade of red, then purple, then a ghastly white. She looked at Whitfield for support, but the old attorney was staring at the table, his legal career flashing before his eyes. "You conniving little," Patricia started, then caught herself. She looked at the court reporter, who was dutifully recording every word. "I want this meeting adjourned immediately," Patricia demanded. "We will challenge this in court." Whitfield finally spoke, his voice thin. "Patricia, I advise extreme caution. If this document is authentic and if the power of attorney is proven fraudulent, we are looking at serious criminal exposure." "Criminal?" Patricia hissed. "Whose side are you on?" I remained seated, my hands folded on the table. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head, and reality was even more satisfying than the rehearsal. "Shall I read the relevant portions?" I asked, addressing the room. No one objected. Even Patricia, despite her fury, seemed frozen by morbid curiosity. I opened the envelope and unfolded Daniel's true will. I read aloud, my voice steady. "I, Daniel James Carter, being of sound mind and body, hereby revoke all prior wills and testaments. To my wife, Amelia Rose Carter, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all real property, business interests, investment accounts, and personal assets. It is my express wish that Amelia assume full operational control of Carter Development Group as chairwoman of the board." I paused and looked at Patricia. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. I continued reading. "To my brother, Thomas Andrew Carter, I leave the sum of $2 million to be paid directly and unconditionally within 90 days of probate." Thomas's eyebrows shot up. That was 4 times what Patricia's version had offered, and without the humiliating "at her discretion" clause. "To my mother, Patricia Ashford Carter, I leave the contents of a letter, enclosed herewith, which I ask the executor to read aloud at the time of this will's presentation." I reached into the envelope and pulled out a smaller, sealed letter. Daniel had written "For Mother" on the front in his own handwriting. I opened it and read, "Mother, I know what you did. I know about the power of attorney. I know about Whitfield. I know you visited him every Tuesday at 3 p.m. for 2 months, planning how to redirect my estate after I died. I know you told Aunt Diane that Amelia was a gold digger who would squander the family fortune. I know you told Thomas he deserved more than me, not because you believed it, but because you wanted him angry enough to support your takeover. I have loved you my entire life, despite everything. Despite the way you controlled every decision I made. Despite the way you treated Amelia, a woman who gave up her nursing career to support me and build our life together. Despite the fact that when I was diagnosed with cancer, your first phone call was to a lawyer, not a doctor. You are my mother, and I will always love you. But I will not let you destroy the person I love most. Amelia is my legacy. Not the money, not the company. Her." I looked up. Patricia was trembling. The color had drained from her face entirely. Thomas was staring at his mother with an expression that hovered between shock and dawning recognition. Rebecca had her hand over her mouth. Diane was crying, which surprised me because I had always assumed she was incapable of genuine emotion. Whitfield was already on his phone, presumably calling his own attorney. The court reporter's fingers had stopped moving. She was just staring. I placed the letter on the table. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Daniel had said everything. Patricia looked at me. For the first time in 7 years, there was no mask, no performance, no strategy. Just a woman who had been completely and utterly exposed. "You think you've won," she whispered. "I don't think anything, Patricia." I picked up the envelope and stood. Daniel made his wishes clear. Now it's up to the court to honor them. I walked out of the conference room. My heels clicked against the marble floor of the hallway. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, pressed the lobby button, and watched the doors slide shut. Only then did I allow myself to exhale. The ride down was 17 floors. I counted every one. By the time I reached the lobby, my legs were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. Outside, Manhattan was its usual chaotic self. Horns blaring, pedestrians rushing, the smell of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor. I pulled out my phone and called Martin Hale. "It's done," I said. How did she react? Like a woman who just realized the ground she was standing on was quicksand. There was a pause. Then Martin said, "She'll fight back. She has to. Her entire self-image depends on winning this." I know. I hailed a cab. "Martin, what's our next move?" "First, we file Daniel's will with the probate court immediately. Second, we report the fraudulent power of attorney to the State Bar Association and the District Attorney's Office. Gerald Whitfield's career is over." "And Patricia?" Martin hesitated. "That depends on how far you want to take this. She committed fraud, forgery, and attempted theft of an estate worth tens of millions of dollars. If prosecuted, she's looking at serious prison time." I stared out the cab window at the city rushing by. She's Daniel's mother. I know, and that makes it complicated. But Amelia, Daniel wanted you to fight. He wouldn't have prepared all this if he expected you to show mercy. "I'll think about it," I said. But I didn't need to think for long. Over the next 48 hours, Patricia launched her counterattack with the ferocity of a cornered predator. She hired Blackwell and Associates, one of the most aggressive litigation firms in New York. Their first move was to file a motion to block the probate of Daniel's will, claiming it was executed under duress and that I had manipulated a dying man. I received the legal papers by courier on a Saturday morning. I was sitting in the kitchen, drinking coffee and staring at the roses Daniel had planted 3 years ago. They were wilting. I hadn't had the heart to prune them. The filing was 12 pages long. It alleged that I had isolated Daniel from his family during his illness, that I had introduced him to Martin Hale without Patricia's knowledge, and that Daniel's mental state was compromised when he signed the second will. I called Martin. "Have you seen this?" "I have." He sounded calm. "It's exactly what I expected. The duress argument is weak. Daniel's will was witnessed by 2 independent parties who will testify he was lucid and deliberate. And the medical records from that period show he was in a stable phase between treatments." "What about the isolation claim?" Martin actually laughed. "Patricia visited Daniel exactly 4 times during his 9-month illness. You were there every single day. The hospital visitor logs prove it. If anyone was isolated from Daniel, it was by his own choice because he didn't want to see his mother." That afternoon, I received an email from Patricia. It was brief and venomous. "Amelia, I don't know what lies Daniel told you or what that ambulance chaser Martin Hale convinced you to do, but this is far from over. You married into this family. You are nothing without the Carter name. I suggest you accept the original terms before I make your life a living hell." I read the email twice, then forwarded it to Martin. "Evidence of intimidation," he said. "She's digging her own grave." The following week, I received a call from Thomas. I was surprised. Since the reading, he hadn't reached out. "Amelia, can we talk?" He sounded different, subdued. "Sure, Thomas. Where?" He suggested a coffee shop in Stamford, neutral territory. I agreed, but I brought my phone with the voice recorder active. Martin had taught me well. Thomas was already there when I arrived. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. His eyes were bloodshot, and his tailored blazer hung on him like it belonged to someone else. "Amelia, I owe you an apology." I sat down across from him. For what specifically? For believing my mother, for going along with her plan, for not visiting Daniel more when he was sick. He paused. For everything. I studied his face. I didn't see deception. I saw a man who had finally removed a pair of rose-tinted glasses and was horrified by what he saw. "What do you know about the power of attorney, Thomas?" He looked down at his coffee. "She told me Daniel wanted it that way, that he was too sick to handle his affairs and asked her to step in. She said the new will reflected Daniel's true wishes because you had been pressuring him to cut the family out. And you believed that?" Thomas met my eyes. "Yes. Because it was easier than believing my mother was capable of stealing from her dying son." We sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop was quiet. A jazz station played softly from the speakers. "What made you change your mind?" I asked. "The letter Daniel wrote." Thomas's voice cracked. He looked away, blinking rapidly. He said Mom called a lawyer before she called a doctor when he was diagnosed. I checked the phone records. He was right. She called Whitfield at 9:07 a.m. and didn't call Daniel's oncologist until 11:30 a.m. I felt sick. Thomas pushed a USB drive across the table. "I found these on my mother's computer. She asked me to help her transfer files to a new laptop last week. I copied everything that looked relevant." "What's on it?" "Emails between her and Whitfield going back 18 months. Meeting notes. A draft of the fraudulent will with her handwritten annotations in the margins. And financial records showing she's been siphoning money from the Ashford Carter Trust for years." I picked up the drive. My hand was steady, but my heart was racing. "Thomas, why are you giving this to me?" "Because Daniel was my brother." Thomas's voice broke completely. "And I let him down. The least I can do is make sure his wife is protected." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Thomas." He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "One more thing. My mother has been meeting with someone named Victor Crane. He's not a lawyer. He's a private investigator. She hired him to dig up dirt on you." "Dirt on me?" I almost laughed. I'm a former pediatric nurse who spent 7 years taking care of her husband and organizing charity events. What dirt could there possibly be? Thomas shrugged. She's desperate. Desperate people invent stories. After Thomas left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, processing everything. Then I called Martin and told him about the USB drive. "Bring it to my office immediately," he said. "If those emails contain what I think they contain, we can file a criminal complaint with the Fairfield County District Attorney by Friday." I drove to Martin's office. We spent 4 hours reviewing the files. The emails were devastating. In one, Patricia wrote to Whitfield, "Gerald, the power of attorney must be airtight. If that woman gets a single dollar more than the house and the allowance, I will hold you personally responsible." In another, make sure the will references Daniel's wishes regarding family legacy. Use emotional language. If it ever goes to court, the jury needs to believe Daniel wanted this. And the most damning email, sent just 3 days before Daniel died. "Gerald, I've spoken with the hospice nurse. She says he has days, maybe a week. We need to file the will immediately after the death certificate is issued. I don't want that woman to have time to hire her own attorney. I stared at that last email until the words blurred. She was counting down the days of her son's life, like a stock trader watching a deadline. Martin closed the laptop. Mrs. Carter, I've been practicing law for 37 years. I have seen some truly reprehensible behavior, but this is the most coldly calculated scheme I've ever encountered. What do? We go nuclear. Martin picked up his phone. I'm calling the DA's office right now. While Martin made legal preparations, Patricia was not sitting idle. 2 days later, I came home to find a FedEx envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a letter from Blackwell and Associates, informing me that Patricia was filing a countersuit, alleging undue influence, elder abuse of Daniel, and fraudulent procurement of the second will. They were also seeking an emergency injunction to freeze all of Daniel's assets pending the outcome of litigation. I read the allegations out loud to Martin over the phone. Elder abuse? I was his wife, not his caretaker, and he was 38 years old. It's a Hail Mary, Martin said. They're throwing everything at the wall. But the asset freeze could be a problem if a judge grants it. How do we stop it? With the truth. Martin's voice was firm. I've already filed our response. We have the hospital records, the visitor logs, the forged power of attorney, the emails from Thomas's USB drive, and the testimony of 2 independent witnesses. Patricia has a fraudulent document and a compromised attorney. I need you to trust the process, Amelia. I trusted Daniel, and Daniel trusted you. So yes, I trust the process. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the Fairfield County Superior Court. I arrived early, dressed in a simple navy suit. Martin was already there, his thick briefcase resting on the plaintiff's table. Patricia entered with her legal battalion, 3 lawyers from Blackwell and Associates, each wearing the aggressive confidence of attorneys billing $900 an hour. Patricia herself was impeccable. Black dress, pearl earrings, her silver hair styled in a flawless chignon. She looked every inch the dignified matriarch. She glanced at me once and looked away, as if I were a stranger she had accidentally made eye contact with on the subway. The judge was the Honorable Margaret Chen, a no-nonsense jurist in her 50s, with a reputation for cutting through theatrics. She reviewed both filings, then addressed the courtroom. I've read the motions from both parties. This is an unusual case involving competing wills and allegations of fraud on both sides. I'd like to hear from both attorneys before I make any decisions regarding the asset freeze. Let's start with the respondent. That was Martin's cue. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and approached the bench. Your Honor, my client, Amelia Carter, is the surviving spouse of Daniel James Carter. Daniel executed a valid last will and testament on June 2nd of this year, 3 months after the competing will presented by the petitioner. Our will was independently witnessed, notarized, and recorded. Martin placed a stack of documents on the bench. Furthermore, we have evidence that the competing will was procured through a fraudulent power of attorney obtained while Daniel was under heavy sedation. We have hospital records confirming Daniel's condition on the date of the alleged signing. Visitor logs showing that attorney Gerald Whitfield was not present at the hospital on that date, and emails between the petitioner and Mr. Whitfield detailing the deliberate falsification of estate documents. Patricia's lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Catherine Wells, jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. These allegations are unsubstantiated and defamatory. My client is a grieving mother who has been subjected to an orchestrated campaign of character assassination by her daughter-in-law. Judge Chen raised an eyebrow. Miss Wells, we're not at trial. This is a hearing. Sit down. Wells sat. Martin continued. Your Honor, I would also like to note that the petitioner's own son, Thomas Carter, has voluntarily provided electronic correspondence corroborating our allegations. He is prepared to testify. The mention of Thomas sent a visible shockwave through Patricia's side of the courtroom. Wells leaned over to Patricia and whispered urgently. Patricia's face went from composed to ashen in the span of 3 seconds. Judge Chen reviewed the documents Martin had submitted. After several minutes of silence that felt like hours, she looked up. I am denying the petitioner's request for an emergency asset freeze. The evidence presented by the respondent raises serious questions about the validity of the competing will. This matter will proceed to a full probate hearing. In the meantime, Mrs. Amelia Carter shall serve as temporary executor of Daniel Carter's estate. The gavel came down. I felt the air rush back into my lungs. Patricia stood up so abruptly that her chair toppled backward. She pointed a trembling finger at me. She is not family. She is a parasite who latched onto my son and poisoned him against his own mother. I will not allow this travesty. Judge Chen's voice was ice. Mrs. Ashford Carter, one more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. Patricia's attorneys pulled her back. She sat down, shaking with rage, her lips moving silently. Outside the courthouse, the autumn wind was sharp. I stood on the steps, letting the cold air hit my face. Martin walked up beside me. You did well in there. I didn't do anything. I just sat there. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the truth speak for itself. He paused. But this isn't over. The full probate hearing is in 6 weeks. Patricia will come at you with everything she has. I know. I watched a flock of birds cross the gray sky, but I have something she doesn't. What's that? Daniel. He spent his last months making sure I would be protected. The least I can do is finish what he started. Over the next 6 weeks, Patricia's desperation escalated into something that bordered on unhinged. She hired Victor Crane, the private investigator Thomas had warned me about, to conduct a deep dive into my past. Crane was thorough. He dug up my employment records, my tax returns, my college transcripts, even interviews with former coworkers at the hospital where I used to work. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. I had lived a quiet, honest life. The most scandalous thing in my past was a parking ticket from 2019. But Patricia wasn't satisfied with facts. She needed a narrative. So Crane, under her direction, approached my former colleague, a nurse named Bethany Marsh, and offered her $25,000 to sign an affidavit claiming I had been fired from the hospital for stealing medication. Bethany called me immediately. Amelia, some creepy guy just offered me a bribe to lie about you. Her voice was shaking with fury. He said your mother-in-law would pay me $25,000 to say you were a drug thief. Can you believe that? I could believe it. It was exactly the kind of thing Patricia would do. Bethany, would you be willing to give a statement about what happened? To who? To my attorney and possibly to the police. Hell yes. That woman needs to be stopped. Bethany's affidavit was devastating. It detailed the entire interaction with Crane, including the specific amount offered and Patricia's name as the source of the funds. Martin filed it with the court and forwarded a copy to the district attorney. 2 weeks before the full probate hearing, the DA's office informed Patricia that she was under investigation for fraud, forgery, and witness tampering. Gerald Whitfield, meanwhile, had already been suspended by the State Bar Association pending a disciplinary hearing. He was cooperating with authorities, which meant he was telling them everything about Patricia's scheme. The dominoes were falling. Patricia's world was collapsing around her, and she knew it. She made one last desperate move. 3 days before the hearing, she showed up at my door. It was 8 p.m., raining. I saw her through the security camera. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her designer armor was gone. She wore a simple coat and her hair was down, wet from the rain. I almost didn't open the door, but something, maybe Daniel's voice in my head, told me to let her in. I opened the door. She stood on the porch, her eyes red, her hands clasped in front of her. "Amelia, may I come in?" I stepped aside. She walked into the foyer and stopped. She looked around the house. Daniel's house. Our house. And something in her face crumbled. "I used to bring Daniel here when he was a boy," she said quietly. "He loved the backyard. He used to chase fireflies in the summer." I didn't respond. I just waited. Patricia turned to me. "I know I can't win. My lawyers told me this morning. The evidence is overwhelming. Whitfield is cooperating. Thomas turned against me." She paused. "And the DA is going to indict me." I still said nothing. She took a shaky breath. "I came to ask you. I'm not going to beg, but I came to ask you to consider not pressing criminal charges. I'll drop the lawsuit. I'll accept Daniel's real will. I'll walk away from the estate entirely. Just please don't send me to prison." I looked at the woman standing in my foyer. 7 years ago, at my wedding, she had pulled me aside and whispered, "Don't think for a second that you belong in this family. You're a temporary arrangement." Now she was standing in my house, begging me for mercy. "Patricia," I said slowly, "why did you do it?" She stared at the floor. "Because I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of being irrelevant." Her voice cracked. "Daniel was my whole life. When he got sick, I realized that without him, without the money, without the name, I was nobody. I spent 30 years building a life around wealth and status. Without it, I don't even know who I am." I let the silence stretch. Then I said something I had been preparing for weeks. "I won't press criminal charges." Patricia looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "But not because you deserve mercy," I continued, "because Daniel loved you despite everything. And honoring his memory means not destroying the people he cared about, even the ones who tried to destroy me." Patricia's composure finally broke. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. It was the first genuine emotion I had ever seen from her. "I'll accept the terms of Daniel's will. You will sign a legally binding agreement relinquishing all claims to the estate and the family trust. You will publicly acknowledge the validity of Daniel's second will. And you will never contact me or attempt to interfere with my management of Daniel's legacy." She nodded through her tears. "And Patricia?" She looked at me. "Get help. Real help. Not another lawyer or another scheme. A therapist. Someone who can help you figure out who you are without the money." She wiped her eyes, nodded once more, and walked to the door. On the threshold, she stopped. "He really loved you, didn't he?" I felt my throat tighten. "Yes, he did." She stepped into the rain and walked to her car. I closed the door and leaned against it. My entire body was trembling. The probate hearing was anticlimactic after that. Patricia's attorneys formally withdrew all objections. Gerald Whitfield's testimony confirmed the fraud. The judge validated Daniel's true will in its entirety. I was awarded the full estate, approximately $60 million in assets, including Carter Development Group, 3 commercial properties, an investment portfolio, and the Westport House. Thomas received his $2 million, free and clear. He called me after the ruling. "Amelia, thank you. Not just for the money, but for giving me my brother back." I didn't understand what he meant at first. Then he explained. "For years, my mother told me Daniel thought I was incompetent, that he didn't want me involved in the business because he didn't respect me. It was all lies. Daniel's letter proved he loved me and wanted me to succeed on my own terms. Thomas paused. I wasted years being angry at a brother who was actually trying to protect me. I'm done being angry. After the legal dust settled, I threw myself into running Carter Development Group. It was overwhelming at first. I was a nurse, not a CEO. But Daniel had left detailed notes, memos, and even a handwritten guide titled, "How to Run the Company," for Amelia, who will probably panic at first. I found it in his desk drawer at the office. The first page read, Step 1. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong here. You do. Step 2. Hire people smarter than you, which shouldn't be hard because you married me, and I'm setting the bar pretty low. Step 3. When in doubt, ask yourself what the right thing to do is. Then do it, even when it's expensive. I laughed until I cried. Within 6 months, I had assembled a new executive team, completed 2 stalled development projects, and secured a partnership with a sustainability-focused architecture firm that Daniel had been courting before his diagnosis. The company didn't just survive, it thrived. I also established the Daniel Carter Foundation, a nonprofit providing financial literacy education and legal aid to women going through divorce, estate disputes, and financial abuse. The foundation's motto, taken directly from Daniel's letter, was "Fight for yourself." Patricia kept her word. She dropped all legal actions, signed the relinquishment agreement, and moved to a modest townhouse in Vermont. I heard through Diane that she had started seeing a therapist. I hoped that was true. Gerald Whitfield was disbarred and faced criminal charges for his role in the fraud. He pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and received 2 years of probation. Victor Crane, the private investigator, lost his license after Bethany Marsh's affidavit was made public. And Bethany? I hired her as the head nurse of a free clinic the foundation opened in Bridgeport. She was the first person I called. One evening, about a year after the probate hearing, I was sitting in the backyard of the Westport house. Daniel's roses had been pruned, fed, and were blooming again. The sunset was painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I was holding a glass of wine and reading the evening news when I came across a small article. The Ashford Carter Family Trust, formerly controlled by Patricia, had been dissolved. The remaining funds, after legal fees, were donated to a hospice care organization in Daniel's name. I set the paper down and looked at the roses. For a long time, I had been afraid that fighting back would turn me into someone I didn't recognize, that the anger and the legal battles would harden me into someone Daniel wouldn't have loved. But sitting in that garden, watching the light fade, I realized something. Fighting for yourself doesn't make you hard, it makes you whole. Daniel didn't leave me money. He left me permission to be strong. And Patricia didn't lose because I was ruthless. She lost because the truth, once it's written down and sealed and placed in the hands of someone honest, is the most powerful weapon in the world. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never sign a document you haven't read. Never trust someone who smiles at the funeral more than they cry. Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong in your own life. And if you love someone, truly love someone, protect them, not just while you're alive, but in every document, every plan, and every letter you leave behind. Because love isn't just a feeling, it's a fortress. And if you build it right, not even death can tear it down.